Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have two of my good brothers here in the temple. In the red corner, actually no, I'm not going to, in the small red corner, our living Wikipedia and flamboyant flyer, good brother Flutter. I have to give you the small red corner because you are shorter than me.
I'm aware.
And in the other red corner, because he is the Akaoni, the man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadari Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
Zadari Enterprises would like to wish you a happy day and reminder that you need to buy all of the Front Mission remake games now. I don't care if you don't have the money, go do it. This is not a request.
Does that include Gun Hazard?
Yes.
Good, because more people need to play Gun Hazard. Does that also include Evolved?
What? What the fuck is Evolved?
Good answer. And I know somebody say, if we're buying all the Front Mission stuff, does that mean we have to buy Left Alive too? No. I will not inflict that.
To burn.
I will not inflict that abomination on anyone. I ended up playing that. That I had rented that at a Redbox once, and that was the second fastest return I ever did.
I didn't even buy it.
Because I figured, well, it was only gonna cost me $3, so, yeah. Plus, I got my money back because I had returned it so quickly. I was supposed to have it for a week. But we are not here to talk about any of that. Though mecha-related talk will return in the future. It's an inevitability with us. But no, we are here to talk about the weird and wonderful world of spy fiction, a topic I don't get to discuss as much as I'd like. And this time, talking about Bond, James Bond. Obviously, this is a franchise that's gone over many generations over the years, and some may say, if this episode's called the Bond Burn Notice, are we going to be roasting James Bond? Not exactly. See, a burn notice is a complicated thing, but in the simplest way I can put it, it is a notice that a given spy or intelligence agent is seen as an unreliable asset. Or in some cases, a compromised asset. And
to put it even more simply, especially if you've watched the TV show Burn Notice, it is an indication that your identity is known to some other intelligence agency, which is why you can no longer be used as an asset. Essentially, your identity has been burned.
Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people say, well, you probably ended up liking Burn Notice for Bruce Campbell. That certainly helped, but he was only one part of the bigger equation.
I mean, Bruce Campbell is what sold me to watch it, and then the actual story and everything else kept me. Mm-hmm. Sam, oh man, as Sam, yeah. Mm-hmm. No, Bruce Campbell is a fantastic marketing ploy by the creators of the show, because everybody loved Autolycus. Mm-hmm. Everybody loved Autolycus, and then Bruce Campbell was also, in all of those cult favorite movies everybody loves, Boba Hotep, The Evil Dead, etc.
My name is Bruce. Moontrap, if you want to go real deep into the cuts.
I think if we're gonna name a ubiquitous video or ubiquitous feature film starring Bruce Campbell, it's going to be Army of Darkness for most people, though.
Yeah, obviously. I just wanted to do a deep cut.
Oh yeah, I know. But you see, for the people who love Bruce Campbell, this just makes go watch show good because Bruce Campbell's there. How can show possibly be bad? It might be hokey, it might be corny, but that's all Bruce Campbell. Bruce Campbell does hokey, corny real good.
There's also the time when I was at Comic-Con one year at a Burn Notice panel, and when people were complimenting Bruce, he would end up throwing money at them.
That doesn't surprise me, knowing what I know about where Bruce lives. Oh wait, I probably shouldn't say that since I know where Bruce.
Oh,
I found out by complete accident where Bruce lives. I drove past it and saw him.
yeah. But
But
but getting back on the rails.
mhm.
For a lot of people, James Bond was their introduction to spy fiction. In fact, I'd say for whole generations, it's been. Whether it be the OG Connery era, whether it be the Roger Moore era, whether it be the myriad people who have succeeded him in the role.
Mhm.
There's all it's always been a thing, and I know some people will be purists about the differences between the Ian Fleming novels and the on-screen character. Except as I've made clear in the past, being 100% slavish to the source material can be just as much of a problem as it can be a solution. In fact, being 100% slavish to the source material when you're adapting it into another medium can create problems.
Especially considering that books tend to be a lot longer and more detailed than would be accounted for in a feature film.
Yeah, especially and the idea of anybody doing a feature film for more than 90 minutes in the 1960s would be akin to witchcraft. Hell, it caused a shitstorm when Titanic was so long it required two VHSs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, nowadays that's not as much of a problem. People are used to 2-hour movies, even though some of them really shouldn't be 2 hours. But that's a whole other story. But there has always been an appeal of the spy fiction genre. Being somewhere you shouldn't, meeting someone you shouldn't know, doing business that you have no business doing. One could argue that there's a that there's kind of a Venn diagram between spy fiction and heist movies or heist stories, and I think it's because they both follow those same three principles. Like, if I changed just a few little things about, say, Ocean's 11, I could make that into a spy movie.
I mean, we already know that overlap exists in crime fiction and law fiction as well. Just look at Yakuza and the overlap into Judgment, also known as Judge Eyes.
Mm-hmm. Or the or the whole thing with Miles Edgeworth getting his own spin-off. Okay, that one's a little bit of a stretch, even though it kind of deals into this in the same genre pool.
I would say Gyakuten Kenji is less of a um, logic puzzle slash find the evidence game and more of an adventure game, actually.
Mm-hmm. Point and of course we talked when we did the Alpha Protocol episode about how there was a bit of a resurgence when it came to spy fiction in the early 2000s, and in one form or another, there's been a presence of Bond throughout the decades since the 60s, and there's been some ups and downs, but it feels like ever since I want to say GoldenEye, there's been issues regarding identity, and that's something I felt was an interesting topic to broach. Because you have a franchise that's been around for decades, has had multiple actors, much like, say, Doctor Who, but Doctor Who up till recently, and then again very recently, I'm not getting into that. It felt like with the incarnations of that character, there was a degree of consistency. And with James Bond, there's even more of a reason for that consistency because at the end of the day, he's treated as a pulp character, somebody coming in to solve a problem. which is why the identity issue over the last few years has been interesting, and it's something that I wanted to explore here. Obviously we start out with the Connery era in the swinging '60s, as it were. Then there was the Roger Moore era in the '70s, which there was a massive spy boom in the '70s that doesn't get talked about in the same regard, especially like mid '70s. I mean, you had the Man from Uncle, you had the I would say early incarnations of Mission Impossible. Even Doctor Who went a little bit spy themed in the Pertwee era.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get aside from the weirdness that was Moonraker, Moore had a decent run, I think. Oh,
Moore
that
is
go
the
ahead.
second most prolific,
Mhm.
technically.
Yeah, although for whatever reason, to some people, it's like they've tried to meld together Connery and Moore.
Well, I think that has to do with the fact that Connery and Moore were both directed by Guy Hamilton. Connery as he was stepping down after Diamonds Are Forever, and Rod and Moore with Live and Let Die. Some of these are actually very successful films too.
Hmm.
So the the big thing is that like one of Connery's most iconic films, Goldfinger, was also directed by Guy Hamilton. And then as we move through uh, Diamonds Are Forever, and then Live and Let Die, and then even The Man with the Golden Gun was Guy Hamilton. So they probably blend them because Connery's one of Connery's most popular films, followed by Connery's last film and Moore's first film, are all the same director, so it has a lot of the same directing style.
Hmm. That certainly that certainly helped. Um, I'd also say that the I've seen some people say that the attempt at cool that Bond has done has ended up being less and less in vogue. But I'm not entirely sure if I think that's the case, especially since we see that same sort of cool professionalism carried in through things like John Wick.
Well, that sort of cool professionalism is an extension of noir at its most basic themes.
Yeah.
And noir at this point has been acknowledged as something that is somewhat timeless. So
Hmm. Uh, yeah, I know George Lazenby also had dipped into the role a little bit, but he only did it. He really only did it like once for on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
he only did it once because Connery was unavailable for that movie. And honestly, I think it served better that Connery wasn't there. Lazenby does an excellent job as Bond, and especially for that movie, the movie where the one time Bond actually had someone he loved so much he was going to marry them, and then she dies.
Hmm. Um, I'd say the one that's the most that's certainly divided was Timothy Dalton. And don't get me wrong, as an actor, I love Timothy Dalton. He's done plenty of really great works, especially since he's one of those who seem to have gotten better with age.
Yeah. Well, and Dalton only really got two movies. He
Hmm.
didn't really get to explore Bond as a character as much as Moore or Connery, or even later Brosnan and Craig.
Yeah, he was only in The Living Daylights and License to Kill.
And to be honest, I think more people remember him from License to Kill.
Yeah. The only thing I remember from Living Daylights is the fact that the same band that that Aha did the theme for that. The Take on Me guys.
Yep.
And
I remember.
Like I said, it wasn't, and there was this attempt to try and do a more thoughtful, more mature, less, for lack of a better term, cowboy kind of spy with him, and it just didn't work. And
Well, and it's not just the cowboy aspect. Bond in general in the films, even all the way back as far as Connery, was suavity and that, like I said, that timeless semi-noir professionalism mixed with a little bit of hokey campy.
mm-hmm.
Like many of the gadgets, even in modern day, were hokey campy.
Yeah, and I know some people have made fun of some of the ridiculousness of several of the gadgets, but I think with some of them it's just an excuse to put him in some sort of luxury vehicle that had a few twists. The one that's the most iconic when it comes to that is
The Aston Martin.
yeah, the Aston Martin in The Spy Who Loved Me.
That Aston Martin has never ever been outshone by any other car from the Bond franchise, and anyone who says it has is wrong.
I mean, I'd imagine that was a particular nightmare for the practical effects team because you're trying to have a car convert into a submarine.
They probably used a model monk.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest.
Probably. Uh, if only because the idea of doing that full scale would be ridiculously expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But there was that resurgence with Brosnan that seemed to have a particular direction, especially with GoldenEye. This idea of, for lack of a better term, a man out of time. That the world had changed and his particular freewheeling style attitude wasn't applicable anymore.
I can see that, and yet he's still got results.
Mm-hmm. But I'd say the bigger thing to come out of it was um the tension between him and M. I think that I'm not going to say that was the first time that had happened, but it was definitely one of the early times of it being prevalent, and certainly carried by the late Judi Dench.
Yes, and I think that the reason that particular friction existed was because M, in these cases, was an older matronly figure.
Mm-hmm.
M, in a lot of cases, has been a man. But there was this. It was almost a grandmother corralling her her rowdy grandchild sort of feel.
Which I can definitely get. Even more so. What ended up helping it in the case of GoldenEye is, well, what the chief villain was a former 00 agent and a former friend, which gives more of a personal touch to the whole thing.
Tack on another Sean Bean death, by the way.
Yeah. The Sean Bean death meme has been a bit overstated, but sometimes
he has died in less movies than he has not died in, just so everybody knows that.
Yeah. It's just that the movies he's died in are the most successful movies he's been in.
Along with TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, Game of Thrones season 1.
Yeah. And then let's not talk about later seasons of Game of Thrones.
That's why I specified season 1.
Mm-hmm.
Leave it.
But But the problem with that kind of mindset, that whole thing of a personal enemy like that, is that it has and the man out of time, that has a very short shelf life. And the films that followed during the Brosnan era, while I won't say I disliked any of them, there was the issue of not knowing what to do next with that angle. So they fell back on things like the Russians, or things that leaned a little bit more into the campy end of the 70s while still trying to be modern.
Well, I mean, Moonraker was almost absolutely a response to the fact that, the space race had technically been won, but the Soviets were still seen as a threat even in the space race. So Moonraker was just like, yeah, let's do that, because let's be perfectly honest here. The Moonraker book there's a lot of differences. Sure, it still features the early portions of the space race, but the film is much more indicative of late 70s sci-fi. Like, you've got the silver suits and the ray guns and everything. So, like, they tried to do spy fiction in late 70s sci-fi, and I don't care what anyone says. That Moonraker is fantastic. We love that campy movie. Roger Moore plays the straight man in that film so well. We stand Moonraker in my household.
Like, I don't.
Also, reminder that unfortunately the late great Richard Keel, and I say unfortunately because of late, was Jaws, and later Happy Gilmore's boss.
Yeah, and if we're gonna talk about camp, Jaws is a perfect example of that, because
Those fucking silver teeth.
And it's already been tested, the fact that the human jaw cannot make enough, even if you give metal teeth like that, the human jaw cannot generate enough power to bite cable.
What's really funny is that it's based off of a hoodlum from the novel version of The Spy Who Loved Me named Sol Horowitz.
Which is part of the reason why it's a complicated affair when you're doing the book to film comparison with a character like James Bond, because it's not a case where they completely went into their own direction. It was a case where it was a lot of grab bag. That's the way I've always viewed it.
Yeah. I would really like to point out just the other part of camp that is in James Bond fiction, and that is character names.
Yeah.
I mean, looking at Moonraker, remember the CIA agent / scientist from NASA was named Goodhead. Her name was Holly Goodhead.
And there's been that. Let's also not forget that you had Pussy Galore.
Pussy Galore.
You had Octopussy, who was and the whole cult in that regard.
Yeah. There's I mean, let's talk about or the man with the golden gun, Mary Goodnight. That name is just,
and there's a part of me that wonders if, in the name of trying to go more grounded in the in from Brosnan onward, they ended up writing themselves into a corner.
You mean starting with Craig?
Um, I'd say Craig was Craig was where the problem really started to more and more set in. But the
Or do you
canary
just
in the
mean
coal
after Goldeneye?
yeah, the canary in the coal mine started in the years after Goldeneye.
Okay.
Uh, I think a lot of it is the notion of going back to what one knows. If you look at a lot of the MacGuffins and the like, they were built around the conflicts and technologies of their time. You know, the emerging things like microchips, nuclear power, and alternative energies. But it's like when you couldn't use the Russia card as much anymore, that a direction shifted. And am I saying that Bond should have tackled the war on terror? Absolutely not. I'm not going that far. But the the point
Well,
is that that more personal touch that we saw with GoldenEye, as I said before, had a limited shelf life, and there wasn't really a clear idea of what to do after that.
I so out of the three other Brosnan movies,
Mm-hmm.
the bad guys were technically Chinese funded terrorists, you know, um,
An oil baroness.
an oil baroness with her Russian guard dog. Because,
And whatever the hell Die Another Day was, that was
Die
I
Another Day was an attempt to do more socialists are the bad guys in a really bad way. Because the whole point was, let's take this fantastical satellite that concentrates solar rays to use it as a giant laser gun at Earth to burn through the demilitarized zone and allow North Korea to take over South Korea, ignoring the fact that that idea is fucking retarded. Like the sun laser thing was fucking retarded. I hated that thing in Die Another Day. But let's also not ignore the fact that North Korea's army and people have been starving for 30 years now. There was no way the DPKR was going to be able to do this.
it'd probably be the shortest fight in history.
Especially because the U.S. would be right there. The U.S. is an ally of South Korea.
But the but again, with some of these, it feels like they were trying to channel like the 70s era into the 90s, and then later late 90s. And don't get me wrong, aside from Die Another Day, the other ones in that quartet, I really like. Obviously, I'm not going to say anything bad about GoldenEye. Tomorrow Never Dies. I'd say is probably the weaker entry, but nowhere near bad. And The World Is Not Enough. What was very, very good. And with the Daniel Craig era, in some regards, you could see that era as cursed with bad luck, because let's not forget, we're right in the middle of that spy resurgence, and within that spy resurgence, you have stuff like the Bourne movies, stuff like Alias, stuff like 24, far more grounded affairs, and the temptation to try and do something like that with Bond is going to be very strong.
Yeah.
And then, right in the middle of all that, the writer's strike happens. So a lot of the plans that they had kind of fell by the wayside. Obviously, there's the whole thing with Casino Royale trying to be a origin story that's people say closer to the books, but I feel like I have to put some asterisks on that.
I mean, it's certainly closer to the books than the fucking 1967 version of Casino Royale. You know, one of the two non-Eon films that starred an actor that nobody remembers.
Mm-hmm.
David Niven.
Yeah.
Also, I will point out that David Niven does not look like a Bond. I don't know why. No, I know why David Niven doesn't look like a Bond to me, Monk.
Why?
Go look at a picture of David Niven in Casino Royale, and tell me you can't hear a certain theme song for a certain French detective in your head.
Okay, I have to double.
I think you could find a picture of him on the Casino Royale 1967 page on Wiki. Just look at him. That's Clouseau. That is not Bond. That is Clouseau. That is Jacques Clouseau.
Yeah.
No hate to David Niven, who I'm sure at this point has sadly passed away. Yes.
He passed in '83.
Yeah. I mean, he was already pretty old by the time he did Bond. No shade on Niven. I'm sure he was a fantastic actor. In fact, if I remember correctly, watching the '67 the '67 Casino Royale, I did enjoy his acting, but he just doesn't have the gravitas in the way his face is built to pull Bond.
Mm-hmm.
He definitely could pull a nice Jacques Clouseau or any other. Like, I could see him doing, like, if he were to do a movie for a movie version of or even just a Broadway or a stage play of Cicero de Bergerac. And I'm sure, like, looking at the movies he was in, some of them were pretty big for their time. So I definitely can agree that he was probably a really good actor, but he just does not feel like Bond.
Not to mention the idea of a spy is that they should be somebody who could blend in easily. Which is why you have a very it's hard for me to describe it, but you shouldn't be standing out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a more face in the crowd kind of thing, which is what, even if the face in the crowd is more of a high society affair.
Mm-hmm.
But and as far as that whole dipping back into what came before, well, that ended up happening again with the Craig era because somebody got the bright idea, hey, let's bring back Spectre.
Spectre was always a better choice for a villain, to be honest.
If anything, don't get me wrong, I'm not against the idea of utilizing Spectre, especially since it wasn't utilized all that much in the films. It was it was twice in the '60s and once in the '70s.
Mm-hmm.
And now I can understand not wanting to overexpose it. I mean, if every film had a villain who was somehow tied to Spectre, you would have the Moriarty problem.
Yeah, I know. I understand that, but Spectre as an organization, not just Blofeld, but the organization, is a better idea as a evergreen antagonist, because as an organization, they wouldn't just be beholden to one person, because they're considered an entire like vast worldwide organization. You'd have branch leaders and department leaders. You could that would make up for a very evergreen enemy.
Kind of like what was done back in the Showa era with Shocker.
Eh, I
Okay,
don't
bad
know if
example.
yeah, I was going to say I don't think that particular comparison can be made. Spectre has always been implied to be something large, even though for the longest time we only ever saw Blofeld and his little cabal, and Blofeld was the ostensibly head of the whole organization. But we've seen the things Spectre can do, the massive bases they built in fucking false mountains and shit.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way a tiny organization, as was implied by what we would see with Blofeld, can do that. So maybe he's the head. Sure, maybe he established Spectre, but as he picked out the talents, because Blofeld was a very smart man who understood that he couldn't do everything himself.
Yeah.
As he picked out the talents, as he filled out the hierarchy and created an actual large scale organization, Blofeld wouldn't even need to be involved in the day to day. Sure, it makes, for the times that Spectre was at its biggest usage in the movies, this was the time in spy fiction where having a dastardly mastermind was vogue. It was the popular thing.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, instead of having a dastardly mastermind, that makes things personal, because that's the other reason why it was done that way. You can have this large scale semi-autonomous organization where Bond discovers Spectre's responsible for this specific set of terroristic actions happening in this part of the world right now, goes and says, who made this plan? It's like, this is just one of the many plans people in our planning department made. Why? What? Because that's what an actual organization, an anti-terrorist organization would do. That's what actual intelligence organizations in real life do. Everything's not beholden to one person. So that's why I think Spectre could have been the perfect evergreen antagonist if they had ever been handled correctly.
Yeah. Instead, and this is the reason why I bring up the use of bringing back Spectre or doing a rebooted version of Blofeld and whatnot, is it is being used as a member berry in an era where it doesn't fit.
A member berry in an era where it doesn't fit and honestly isn't necessary.
Mm-hmm.
The primary draw of the James Bond franchise has always been that James Bond and how he deals with the problems around him.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people the film that's considered the best in the Craig era has
Skyfall.
been Skyfall, which one could see some parallels, not directly, but in an indirect sense, to that of GoldenEye. Dealing with someone who has a personal grudge, a focus on the relationship between 007 and M. And more importantly, I think what ended up helping it was the notion of putting Bond in a kind of underdog situation. If not underdog, then putting him on the defensive. I think is the best way for me to put it. Now, obviously, Raul Silva is a very good villain. Although I've seen some say that it was unfortunate timing that his particular villain arc seemed a bit too familiar to say Bane, but I don't quite get it.
I mean, it's because of the whole tortured into the darkness and upbringing thing.
Except part of his particular torture was the fact that like a good agent, he tried to use the death pill that he was given.
And it didn't work.
It didn't work, and it just made the problem worse. It was a case of he he just said he ended up having the worst circumstance possible and broke.
Yep.
Uh,
I'll also be honest. Skyfall was where after watching Skyfall, that's where I stopped watching Bond movies. I haven't seen any of the other Craig movies.
Spectre with Spectre, like I said, the reintroduction of Spectre was a member berry, and the way Skyfall ended, it seemed like it seemed like it was setting things up to go with a new direction, with a new board, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And that was never followed through on, because the idea is let's go back to what worked in the past. Something that you and I have talked about many times on how that does not work.
Unless you understand why what worked in the past, introducing past elements is just empty fluff.
That's the reason why I do agree with you that on paper, Spectre could be an evergreen kind of villain faction that could be utilized. I mean, I was a big fan of the Carmen Sandiego stuff when I was a kid, and with that you had so much tied to Vile. You know, just use that Rogues Gallery as one example of how you can have that kind of evergreen setup.
Exactly.
And truth be told, instead of using Shocker as a parallel, I should have used Foundation X.
That would have been a better comparison. Because Foundation X is still an evergreen villain faction, even in Reiwa era.
Yeah, I mean it hasn't shown up in a long time, but it's not like the heads of Foundation X were ever taken out.
Mm-hmm.
What was that? At most, a organizational branch was taken out, and those can easily be replaced.
Exactly.
And there was already the implication that they had their hands in several projects.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of thing could be just as well with Spectre. In fact, I think we even kind of did that when we did the idea of reconstructing Rogue Agent to be a little bit more freeform, and the quote unquote best ending would be joining up with Spectre.
Mm-hmm.
The hardest if we made that into a game, it'd be the hardest ending to go with, because it involves doing much more challenging missions, but the reward is worth it.
Indeed.
And I contrast that with bringing in Spectre, bringing in Blofeld, bringing in a lot of names of characters that were utilized in the past. While there's certainly been recurring villains, that idea of making a brand new version of an old name, that's never really been a thing, and it's something that doesn't have a high success rate, in my opinion. Because by using that name, you're bringing up what came before, and in the case of in the case of Spectre and then No Time to Die, the of all the people to use for Blofeld, um, they end up going with Christoph Waltz.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I like Christoph Waltz as an actor. He's phenomenal in just about everything he does. But this was about a year removed from Inglourious Bastards, and it's kind of hard, and he's more or less playing the same kind of character. I feel like the sole reason he was brought in was because of the success he had as Hans Landa in Inglourious Bastards.
Yeah.
And I think that's that kind of distraction didn't help. If you really wanted him to do Hans Landa, just have him do it. Just obviously not as a German.
Hmm.
Uh, although truth be told, I'm
Yeah.
reminded of how in in some film projects I've studied in the past, the director specifically wanted non-stars to avoid this exact same problem. Like
Huh.
I remember for Dark City, the producers gave a bunch of different suggestions of celebrities to play the character, but the director wanted somebody who could be seen as more of a blank slate, and using any of the suggested celebs would have distracted from the matter.
Yeah. Tainted the blank slate.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's the same reason that you have certain actors who you're always gonna see them, and you're not gonna see the character that they're portraying. Um, if I have to
I mean,
use a obvious example, look at every time every film that Dwayne Johnson has done for decades now.
I was I was I was going to use someone a little more close to home for you, Monk. What
Who
about Idris Elba?
you know I c- for the, I'd like to say that, but a easy counter argument would be his portrayal with Knuckles, although even that's still
No, that's
stretch.
still Idris Elba.
Yeah,
That's just Idris Elba channeling his inner dude, bro.
when but the, I will admit there's a bit more range with him than say Dwayne. I don't think Dwayne's a horrible actor. I just think he only knows how to play Dwayne.
I mean, except when he's playing someone else in his body. Hello, Jumanji 2.
Hmm. I haven't seen either of the rebooted Jumanjis.
Um,
Just that original one from when I was a kid.
that original one that's the only good one, you mean? I
Well,
mean,
that and the cartoon.
no, yeah, no, no, shade on any of the actors, Jack Black, Kevin Hart, etc.
Mm-mm.
They did the best they could, but really, it's just the writing of the movies that is shite.
Like I'm sure that Giant Gonzalez was a nice guy outside the ring. His matches still sucked. I am sure that all the actors are nice people, but you can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit.
Mm-mm.
Exactly.
Oh,
No, the the blank slate thing, though, I don't think you like. I wanted to ask the question, Monk. Where's this comparison going?
oh, it's more the fact that with I feel that with having Waltz portraying Blofeld
You
in
feel
the
that everybody was just going to see him as Hans Landa?
yeah, especially with how close these releases were.
I can see that.
That
I
it,
can honestly see that.
that is
That's
why I
nice.
brought those other elements,
Mhm.
because that distraction could happen. And truth be told, I'd be kind of iffy about doing a new Blofeld anyways,
I
unless you're going
mean,
to do it unless you're going to do it properly, as we mentioned with Spectre earlier, and not
yeah.
just use it as a member berry, which is what it felt like.
Well, I mean, from what I'm reading here, he just took up the name Blofeld to curse Bond, since Blofeld was a name Bond already knew.
I mean, I guess.
Because his name wasn't originally Blofeld. It was.
Yeah, I guess, but it still feels like a member berry.
Oh, it absolutely is. It's definitely supposed to be a thing of going to the audience, especially audience members who've been watching Bond for a long time. See, we didn't forget about what Bond really about. See, look at this.
Yeah, and I suppose we should explain why we're using the term member berries. You know, a term that we have to credit South Park for introducing, and why this is a problem here.
I mean, member berries are just an extension of nostalgia and its sweet poisoning.
Mm-hmm.
This is it's a form of pandering to nostalgia, and that's why we criticize it.
Yeah, because it's as I kind of hinted at with the when we did the design by gospel discussion in regards to sim racing. The problem with these is that you're not using it because it's where the story would naturally lead. You're using it to try and pander to the longtime fans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all pandering to nostalgia, and it doesn't necessarily fit your design ethos at the time. I mean, using Blofeld to pander to nostalgia is certainly more fitting for James Bond than other things, but it's still out of place.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's helped the longevity is not using member berries. Like you look at any sort of long running series, and you really don't have the more successful ones. Really don't have that whole hey, remember this thing from back in the day? Because when you do that, you end up creating a distraction. Because that same audience could say, well, why am I not just going back and watching that thing that's being invoked? And if it's done in a way to try and help move things forward, the big reason why I like legacy heroes, that's one thing. It's when it's used for its own sake that it becomes a problem.
You can refer to past villains, past allies, past heroes when it fits the story being told, especially if it's under the theme of one of the themes that we've seen often and even reconstructed under often of passing the torch.
Mm-hmm.
But doing it just because, oh hey, yeah, see we you totally remember this thing, right? Instead of having an actual reason for it, it's going to cause a discordance in someone's thought process.
Mm-hmm. And I honestly think that in the long run, the legacy that the Craig era is going to have is not going to be considered the worst, but it is going to be considered the most compromised.
Reading the summary of No Time to Die, I think it's No Time to Die.
I have not seen No Time to Die because some of the comments that were made in the lead up to it, along with some of the behind the scenes tumult that happened with the film, that and being released in the worst time to release a film in the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Did not exactly incline me, especially the notion of doing that current year burying the past kind of mindset.
Ugh. Well, and I'm going to be honest. Reading the ending, there have been times where it has been thought that Bond is dead at the end of a movie, but it's always been nebulous at best. Outright having him die? No, you've just alienated the entire fan base.
Supposedly another one is in the works that is meant to be a reboot with a whole new actor, because Craig, up until this point, was looking for any reason to get out of the deal.
I understand. The problem I'm going to have with any new venture, especially if it's a reboot, is as a reboot, are they going to tread old ground again? Are we going to get a rebooted Goldfinger, maybe, or anything of that nature? Because if
Surprise,
so,
motherfucker.
Hey there, Doc. Thanks for the raid.
I think that if they do reboot into other more popular movies from the past. Also, yeah, hi Doc, nice to see you. I don't think it's going to go well, especially because, let's be honest, if they were to reboot and say that they're going to reboot using the most popular film in the franchise, that comparison is going to kill the movie before it even comes out. And also, let's be honest here, Goldfinger was a fantastic movie. There was plenty of drama to it, but there was also plenty of fucking silliness. While we all punched whoever uses Oddjob in the dick on GoldenEye 64, Oddjob as a character in the movie is just... he's a joke. He's a fucking joke. He's funny.
Yeah, and obviously the main thing is the gimmick, because, well, he didn't really talk much. He just
threw his hat.
He was another case of hired muscle, as the one that there's no shortage of.
No pun intended.
Yeah, although Oddjob's not short, he's stocky.
Monk, that's not what the GoldenEye says. Remember that in GoldenEye, Oddjob is shorter than every other character by about a chest height, which is why even aiming at chest height doesn't hit him. It goes over his fucking head.
The best I've been able to find when it comes to that is that it was a programming error.
I would love to ask the programmers who made the game. Unfortunately, I don't think they're in the industry anymore. How many of them went on to later pastures? That's the question.
Yeah. Although I would be remiss if I didn't note that while there was that direction issue with several of the films, the games, especially in like the 6th generation, helped keep some degree of relevance when it came to the character, even if some of the games didn't do as well. The best of them of that era, I would say, is still Nightfire.
Nightfire is a good game. I like Nightfire.
Nightfire is good. From Russia with Love is decent, but given that it came out just after Rogue Agent, it wasn't able to do as well as it probably should have. Because Rogue Agent was a massive disappointment, and shit rolls downhill.
Yep.
And as far as but the big reason I say the Craig era is going to be seen as compromised has less to do with the actor and more to do with the fact that with several entries there was some asterisk that's applied to it. I mean, putting aside Casino Royale, which was certainly viewed as a fresh start at the time.
I mean, I liked Casino Royale. I'll be honest there. It's a really good movie, and it's even a really good Bond movie for the style of Bond movie it was trying to portray. But that is the asterisk, that it's a specific style of Bond movie.
Yeah, but Quantum of Solace felt like they were trying to be like it's like they were trying to ape the Bourne movies.
Well, and especially because Quantum of Solace is based off of not a full novel, but one of Fleming's short stories.
There was also the issue that right around the time it was being produced, the writer's strike happened, as I mentioned before, and the higher-ups decided to bring in a bunch of people who had no business being in a writer's room to fix the problem.
Oh, great.
Yes. Let's hire a bunch of incompetents to fix a problem. Problem gets worse. How could we have foreseen this?
Well, if I were to use an analogy, Did you ever hear about the replacement refs the NFL tried to use back in the late 2000s?
Mm-hmm.
It was so bad it made the game unwatchable. I know some people are like, yeah, refs are gonna suck. No, this was worse. We're t- it was getting so bad that at some games crowds were chanting bullshit.
Not just screaming it, but chanting it in unison.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's when you've gone a step too far. And it was a lot of people who either didn't have a whole lot of experience or only coached in like not even college games but high school games. Some of whom had only refereed in the in gimmick leagues like the like the LFL.
Hmm.
You know, just they were just completely unqualified.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm of the opinion that trying to ape Bourne wasn't going to work because obviously the Bourne movies, shaky cam issues with some of them notwithstanding, were very specific in what they were trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it's one of those apples and oranges things where you're taking a very noir-esque character and trying to put them in a more grounded and realistic setting. Doesn't work. Like imagine taking the Shadow and trying to put him in a police procedural. Wait a minute, we already have that. It's called The Dark Knight.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't as the only reason that ended up working was just sheer raw talent on the director and cast's part.
Yeah, I think they work some magic over there.
Um,
Oh, absolutely.
it's a case of working via black magic.
Uh-huh.
But and of course, then Skyfall seemed to be a case of righting the ship, but then that direction goes right back to the old drawing board. Then again, you kind of have this tug of war about Bond over the decades, where it's like people don't quite grasp why the character is the way he is.
Well, if I'm honest, I think of Skyfall as its own separate thing in the middle of all of Craig's movies. It doesn't feel like any of the others.
Probably
At least one of
because
the
it
ones I
has a
saw.
more committed direction.
Which is funny because the same director was responsible for Spectre. The duality of man, I guess.
It could be that since Quantum of Solace blew up in their face, that they didn't think Skyfall was going to need that much faith in it.
And yet it's considered probably the best or second best Craig movie for sure. I'd say best, but critic reviews are bullshit anyway.
Um, well, I think, and yeah, they were both directed by they were both. I think it was a case where there were a few less hands in things. Um,
Mm.
and because Skyfall was directed by Sam Mendes,
Mm.
but that was the first run that Sam Mendes had with Bond.
He should have just kept going with that run, to be honest.
Hmm.
He did a really good job on Skyfall.
Yeah, the
Maybe it's
predecessor
the writer's
was,
fault.
well, let's see. The screenplay for Quantum of Solace was Neil Purvis, Robert Wade, and Paul Haggis. We literally have an overdressed Haggis.
Heh.
Um, the the screenplay for Skyfall was John Logan, Neil Purvis, and Robert Wade. So one could argue that the editor was Stuart Baird, who's been there for a long ass time. Uh,
I don't mean to be someone who points out the obvious too much. I feel like that's Captain Obvious's job.
and
Neil Purvis and Robert Wade have been on all three of these movies, from Quantum of Solace to Spectre. But the one that saw a nosedive from Skyfall added a screenplay writer by the name of Jeremy Jez Butterworth.
who let's see if we find anything on IMDb for them. I mean, they had
Edge of Tomorrow.
Edge of Tomorrow, which was, but he Edge of Tomorrow. Let's see, the Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Ford v Ferrari.
Hmm. Which Ford v Ferrari was very good.
I don't know.
Black.
I just wonder what happened.
Um. Well, the editor was Lee Smith. And I think that the notion of bringing in 4 screenwriters may have been more the problem than anything else.
I can see that.
I also recall around this time, MGM was going through financial troubles.
Mm-hmm.
Along with Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Columbia Pictures these days has been swallowed up. Unless I'm mistaking them for somebody else.
Let me check.
I mean, they were they. I know that Columbia was part of Sony.
It looks like they're still around.
Yeah, so I stand corrected on that front. I do know MGM was having trouble, and damn near went bankrupt if Amazon didn't grab them. And they've been around, but it's not like the name has done a whole lot. Because about 3 years ago they were acquired for almost $8.5 billion.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came to No Time to Die, well, Sam Mendes was booted out, and instead it was directed by Kari Joji Fukunaga, a literal who. Okay, that's a little bit unfair. He was a producer for the good season of True Detective.
He co-wrote the adaptation of 2017's It.
So, calling him a literal who is a little bit unfair.
I mean, I had never heard of him directly until this movie was announced.
And thank you for the lurk, Doc. And thanks for the raid. I definitely appreciate it. But of course, with No Time to Die, some of the same people were there. Fukunaga was also doing the screenplay, and Phoebe Waller-Bridge was involved. Well, there's your problem. And of course, there's also the fact that and this is one giveaway for me to not see the film. The running time is 2 hours and 43 minutes.
Yeah.
Spectre was only 148 minutes, and I do distinctly remember that there were a bunch of rewrite issues.
I don't know. There are questions and there are other things, and I don't know.
There was also the current year politics. I remember some people trying to argue that um, that Bond as a character was a serial assaulter or some shit like that. Some people even on the actor end of things, which whether or not that's the case is something that people are going to argue back and forth until the cows come home. I don't really care. The issue that I have is that having those kind of arguments or putting that in the public sends the wrong message.
Not only sends the wrong message, but it kind of misses the point. Like,
pretty much. I mean, it's not that I don't disagree. It's that I'm curious where you would see the point of a character like James Bond and the whole thing with the Bond girls, which over the years they've been trying to diminish into just ladies appearing in an action movie.
it's stupid, Monk. It's all just stupid.
Mm-hmm. But you mentioned the noir aspect, which is certainly apropos. And let's not forget that film noir became the thing that it would become as a result of people coming back from the First World War and the man-made horrors beyond mortal comprehension involved in the First World War. You know, that particular cynicism and hope kind of thing that you definitely saw with a lot of detective fiction that came out around that time, and some of that certainly bled over into something like spy fiction, especially the fantasy of this person who's moving in and out of these high society areas as this mysterious face in the crowd. And I know that there's been the attempt to say that James Bond is just a code name, which is
Skyfall disproved him immediately.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I like Skyfall, it did introduce that problem.
Well, no, Skyfall literally showed where the Bond family comes from. So James Bond can no longer be a code name. But even then, if we look at the books have described James Bond's parentage. So no matter what, James Bond was a person, not a code name. The code is 007.
Yeah.
Around that time, there were a lot of people trying to push this idea that various characters in fiction, their names were merely a title. I especially saw this when everybody was trying to push the whole FemThor thing, which was ultimately just revealed to be Jane Foster, and everybody was like, "Why didn't you say that from the get-go? Instead of trying to pretend this was some brand new character." And the problem is as you mentioned before, we have a particular lineage, a particular point of origin when it comes to the character. It's 007 is the code name.
Yeah. Bond in the books has always had parentage. In fact, if I remember correctly, his mother was some flavor of Scandinavian and his father was Scottish, according to the books. So Bond is a person. James Bond is his name. And killing him, sure, you could have another 007, but you can't name that 007 James Bond.
And unfortunately, you'd have to, because that's going to be the name that's going to be recognized.
Yep. So
if you call him anything else, then you're going to have a bunch of fans riot.
yeah, the biggest issue here is that Bond as a character is not something that is a one-size-fit-all character. It's a very distinct character.
Now, if you want an example in spy fiction of somebody who could be a little bit more one size fits all because the name that was given wasn't his real name, Jason Bourne.
Yep.
Like the identity Jason Bourne was merely a setup. A setup to try and draw a known terrorist out in the books, and to a certain extent also in the film. There's the fact that right from the get-go he knows Jason Bourne is not his real name.
Mm.
I've seen some people say that you could do that with Jack Reacher. I don't think so.
Mm-mm.
Neither do I.
Even if the first season of the Amazon series has it that he has no digital profile, Jack Reacher is not an anonymous code name.
Mm-hmm. I will say that him not having a digital profile was taken directly from the book.
Yeah, but the point is he's not a full-on anonymous code name. He is a specific person.
Yeah, he definitely has records of who he was, especially if you can talk to the military and have them declassify them to you.
And because it was already established that he was in the MPs.
Yes, and the implication is not just any normal MP.
Mm-hmm.
That he was part of special investigation units within the MPs, which is true. All of this is from the book, and they actually adapted it fairly well for season 1. I'm quite excited for season 2.
Yeah, I think season 2's already out.
Might be. I have to check.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it came out a few months ago.
But I missed that.
But the point is that is a specific character, and there are some characters where you can do the name is just a title, but even then, as we've talked about before, with times when we talked about passing the torch, you still have to take the concept seriously.
You have to take the concept seriously, and you have to show that mantle has been passed on to someone just as competent. Not necessarily with the same attitudes, because no two people are exactly the same, but the same level of expertise.
Yeah. If you just hand it to anyone else, then you end up diminishing it. And Brian brings up the whole Skywalker thing.
We've already talked about that long time ago.
Yeah. And we kept, when it comes to the whole title thing, we even brought that kind of stuff up with the episode last week when talking about the Mandalorian.
True. I mean, if we're gonna talk Star Wars here for a second, let's take one of the most memed scenes that most people don't realize the severity of from the prequel trilogy. We confer you the title of Jedi, but we do not recognize you as a member of a master on the council.
Mm-hmm.
Jedi Master was a very, very specific and stringent title.
Yep.
And in so doing, he had not shown the type of expertise and bearing necessary to be conferred as Jedi Master. And that was because he had yet to master his own emotions by their standards.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether that's a good thing or bad thing of the Jedi is not part of the conversation. I know that there are plenty of people who are on either side of that argument. But what it shows is that titles or names that are passed down have to be passed down with specific criterion in mind. Otherwise, you're diluting what it means to be whatever that title is.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, in the case of Casino Royale, you have that whole scene where he's like, I understand 00 agents have a short shelf life, so if it's a mistake, it's going to be a short mistake you made promoting me.
Mm.
And it was almost as if with the Craig era they wanted him to spend some time going rogue, which had been done in the past, like with License to Kill, but they couldn't go all in on it, and maybe in hindsight they should. Maybe in hindsight they should have.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm. But with go, but with the no, with that whole notion of a, I was going to say with the whole notion of a man out of time, but I've already talked about that. I'd say something else to bring up is the fact that it just, maybe it's just me, but it feels like when the idea of Russia and the U.S. as rivals in some form or another faded out. Um, it's almost like they're like the direction of who to focus on as the villains or associated villains faded out from a lot of the writing team's mindset, even though there's others you could use.
I mean, I think that might be a consequence of the fact that all the James Bond movies were made right in the middle of the Cold War, or the vast majority of them.
But there's, and if you don't want to lean into War on Terror or something like that because you don't want to piss certain people off, there are certain concepts that have shown up in the last 30 years that you could easily go with. Whether it be something like isolated dictatorships or PMCs. I mean, hell, if Metal Gear is gonna have 2 whole damn games on PMCs, I think you can get away with that. I'm not saying focus on that particular direction, but it's certainly something you can do. And instead just go back to the well of what came before, and get diminishing returns when you try and do that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, am I saying that in the future I want Spectre to come back or something? No, that would be a terrible mistake.
Unless Spectre comes back in the capacity that I described.
Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure if they have the balls to do that.
They don't. It strays too much from the source material. But the source material is books, and writing personal villains in books is a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Which is understandable, but the reason why the whole personal villain thing has a short shelf life for a character like this is because of the fact that you're dealing with what's essentially a pulp character.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you look at other pulp style characters and the stories that they're in, their particular backstory is significantly less important than how their presence affects the world around them.
Mm-hmm.
Usually the backstory that's brought up with them is something that can be summed up in a paragraph or a few bullet points. And a tense relationship with the bosses, a friendly relationship with the handler, in this case Q. Even if in say Skyfall the relationship between Q and Bond was kind of flipped, where you have more or less a rookie Q and a more seasoned Bond, as opposed to a lot of the cases where you have Q being far more seasoned and far less willing to put up with Bond's shit.
I would also
Especially
argue that Q isn't really a handler and more just like the guy who gives him gadgets and tells him to fuck off.
a technician, I guess is the best way for me to put it.
Quartermaster.
Yeah, I'll go with that. The big gag, of course, being please return the thing in one piece, and he never does.
Almost never does.
Well, sometimes he'll return it in one...
It'll be in one piece. It just not all of the extra pieces are there.
Yeah. But the and of course I've seen some say that going with those kind of cars is overdone. If you're going to be infiltrating some kind of place that is high society or underworld high society, it's important to look the part.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Brian says, if Q made an indestructible car, Bond would get it buried somewhere. Probably.
No, if Q made an indestructible car, Bond would find a way to get it to the sun.
Well, we have dealt with orbital lasers at least once, so you're
No!
not...
Bad monk, no donut. That laser was dumb and stupid.
and yet somehow it ended up working in Batman Beyond. Probably because the satellite in Batman Beyond was built to shoot down missiles from the sky.
Yes, it wasn't made to focus sunlight. It was literally made to be a laser cannon that shoots stuff.
Mm-hmm. Because it's made of a special alloy of irony. Although, do you know what's one concept that could easily be a MacGuffin in a future one if you have somebody who understands what they're dealing with?
Bitcoin.
I was gonna say either crypto or AI.
The ice beam telescope? Wrong Batman. He said Batman Beyond, as in the future punk cartoon.
Mm-hmm. The one we built a hypothetical game about a few weeks ago.
Batman Forever. You need to chill out a bit there, Pork Chop.
One of these days I will have to do something in defense of Joel Schumacher, because I do think Batman and Robin and Batman Forever get a little bit over hate. I'm not saying that they're good movies. I just think that the hate's a bit
I still think the funniest Schumacher Batman film is the one where Val Kilmer is Batman, of all people. It's also funniest because we have Ace Ventura Riddler detective. Wait, what? And Tommy Lee Two-Face.
I'm not going to go too much into it, but I will say at the very least the villains in both of those movies had a better understanding of the assignment.
Yes.
Especially Carrie is very much trying to channel the Adam West era. Jones felt like a poor man's Joker, but truth be told, if you're trying to go for campy, Two-Face is the complete wrong guy to use. It's kind of hard to do campy and lighthearted with a guy whose whole gimmick is being horribly mutilated.
I think Tommy Lee Jones just knew that there was something fucked up about them trying to use him as Two-Face and had as much fun with it as he possibly could.
Probably. I mean, it was certainly a break from him playing ultra serious characters around that time. But getting back to the heart of the matter, if if Bond is, I know that they haven't exactly announced who a future Bond is going to be. They've just tooled around with it here and there. I do remember when those Sony emails got leaked. One of the heads was saying that the next Bond should be Idris Elba. In my not so humble opinion, no. And this has nothing to do with ethnicity or anything like that. I know some people tried to make it as such. The reason why is just because Idris Elba is far too stiff for a character like this.
Which is why he makes good stiff neck characters in other places, such as Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty.
Yeah. Now, if you absolutely needed to have him in, don't have him in as Bond, have him in as M.
He'd make a fantastic M. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Or a really good antagonist.
I would put him in as M because at least then you'd have an excuse to use him more than once. And
You'd also have an excuse to have him yell at 007. I'd love to see Idris Elba yelling down James Bond.
Because with Judi Dench and the Bonds that she had to act opposite of, there was always a unspoken tension of her trying to run MI6 with essentially a massive wild card in the form of Bond.
I would like to note that Judi Dench as M had this most. There was the most caustic vocal timbre and facial expressions. Just if looks could kill, if the way people talked could kill, Bond wouldn't have just been dead. She would have dragged him through all 9 circles of hell as many times as she possibly could for the amount of bullshit she put him through, or he put her through.
I mean, the only other person I could think who would give that kind of death stare is and I know this might be a stretch, but CCH Pounder, who I had campaigned for years to on the fact that she should have been the one playing Amanda Waller.
Okay. I see what you're going for. But also, side note, if anybody was going to get on you and say that you don't want Idris Elba because of ethnicity, I said, but he's allowed to say that because he's black.
Fuck off.
Heh.
But
I hadn't gotten that joke in a while. It needed to be said.
But you look at the characters that Elba has played, and they've all been somewhat authority figures who are very inflexible in some regard, or have very commanding presences. Not necessarily cavalier, unflappable, play it by ear kind of characters. That's why I say that Elba would be a bad fit as Bond, but a much better fit as M, because if there was unspoken tension with Dench and say Craig or Brosnan, you put him up against whatever Bond you'd pick for a future film, and you'd have an outright shouting match. Or if things get even worse, outright throwing hands. Because I could easily see him as an M that has no time for anyone's bullshit, which is why it would be such a perfect pick.
Agreed.
And I do think if a character like Bond, which can be a timeless character, is to have any attempt at having a future in terms of future films or incarnations, I honestly think that whoever's doing it needs to have the same kind of attitude that, say, the writers of the Batman had.
Ooh, yeah.
The Batman.
And what I mean by that is, They knew that if they tried to do anything like TAS, they were going to fail. So they didn't. If you need another example, consider when James Cameron got Aliens. He knew that he couldn't do anything like the original, so he didn't try to. Anybody who'd be tackling Bond for whatever this reboot comes out to be should not try and emulate what came before. Doing that would result in disaster.
Mhm.
So as tempting as it would be to bring in Spectre for that, don't. As tempting as it would be to bring in Blofeld or Doctor No or Jaws or any of those characters, even in new names or new actors, don't. Pick it, have a very clear direction and stick to it. And if you can't do that, I don't know, maybe shift Bond over to the small screen for a few years. It would work very easily. I mean, you kind of already have it with some shows. Because not every threat can be world ending. Some threats are more localized.
Mm-hmm.
And what's an interesting parallel in regards to this? Mission Impossible. Because that was a case of successfully rebooting itself. Now, granted, you can't do the whole anonymous thing or actor jumping with Ethan Hunt the way you can with James Bond, but from Ghost Protocol onward, it has rebooted itself into a specific committed direction, and has largely stuck with that direction in the years since. In part because I think they're aware that they can't just do they can't just do Bond and not Bond, but they can't do something that's like Bond, or they're going to be, or that comparison is going to show up. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
one could argue the
That-
first three Mission Impossibles were kind of channeling Bond in some form,
Mm-hmm.
and then they just shifted into the more special ops kind of things, which certainly worked, and I do think that leaning into the noir and leaning into that camp would be the way to go to the future for something like Bond. But the key thing is having a strong direction, that strong identity that you and I talk about to no end.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is important, whether it be a $1 million production or something as small as a fan project. It's important to have a direction, to know what it is you want to do. And I think you and I had called out a few folks when it came to them wanting to make their own TTRPGs, but they had no clear direction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same principle here. In having a direction is vital.
Mhm.
And if you don't have a direction, then you'll end up trying to repeat what came before, and you're gonna end up with the inevitable result. And if you end up doing that, I hope you enjoy blaming others, because that's ultimately what's going to end up happening.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian says, have a plan, fail at the plan, fix the plan, and try the plan again. I mean, no plan survives the first encounter. Yes. At the same time, that doesn't mean don't plan.
Yeah. You make the plan and then you work with it as much as possible before you have to break away from it because none of the parameters fit.
Mm-hmm. But I think with that will do it for this particular episode. This was a bit stretchy, but it was one I wanted to experiment with. Because not all of our episodes are zingers. Some of them have a bit more energy than others. That's just the nature of the beast. That's why. But even with that, I could do nothing but reconstructions in this series, but it would overstay its welcome very fast.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
and it's
Oops,
very much a
sorry.
case of experimenting and self-experimenting. But we will be. I was going to say we'd be back next week, but that is not the case. Because we will technically be back, just not with GeekWatch. Because for one, I'm not going to be doing any streaming at 7 p.m. because I'm going to be watching Double or Nothing that night. 2, at noon on the 26th, All Time Central, we will be doing the Q&A session regarding FF Legend. Because of this, as mentioned on the Discord, you have until 11:45 p.m. on the 25th to submit questions. After that, I'm going to close the form. And now that being said, the schedule is up. I will be doing a couple interviews. We will be back tomorrow with the Parliament of Geeks in one of our shortest turnarounds for Parliament episodes, covering Mazen Kaiser's Skull. Also, on Friday night, after Valley of the Judged, I will be a guest on the Talks in Library show hosted by our good friend Theodore Locus, who has integrated himself quite well into the shenanigans of the monastery. Almost like I should have done this a long time ago.
Almost.
Although I only properly met him fairly recently. And even then, he was still in a corpse, so I didn't even know if I'd be able to reach out to him.
Mm-hmm.
Then again, I never really had issues with Amberglow before the shutdown, so maybe I just have better luck. I think the only problem was I didn't have a good image to use for what they were planning, but that's a whole other story. And it's not going to be for a little bit, and I'm going to be doing some discussion with a friend of mine, but I will be doing in the future be doing a class comparison video when it comes to the classes in Tales of the Valiant, now that the full version has been released to Kickstarter backers, including myself, and contrasting that with the classes in D&D 5e. Because mostly because I wanted to do a follow-up to the Unimpressions video I did a few months back. I am aware that that the Imperial Edition of Adventurer Conqueror King system is close, and I'm not planning on doing a full review of that. Merely a Unimpressions video, because there isn't enough change for me to warrant a full review. But for those, I hope to see you in for that kind of thing, because it should be a fun experience. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Almost caught myself there. Join the watch.
Nearly.